Hello. Our story begins inside the Senate Rotunda, after the traumatizing incident on the capital of the Republic. Coruscant's power grid hadn't been hit by maintenance droids transformed into bombers. There had been no attempt made at peace. The war was still young, and the capital faced the first attack on its soil since the dark days of the Republic. Palpatine brought a monstrous beast back from Malastare in hopes to clone it, remove its plating, and utilize its armor for the clone army. If the beast could deflect blaster fire and lightsabers without enhancements, then it was the perfect device for countering the Jedi. It essentially promised a seamless clone victory during Order 66, and a victory for the clones over the Separatists. Palpatine, obviously, while facing backlash inside the Senate, couldn't talk about Order 66, but he remained determined to remind the blithesome Republic that they were at war. They couldn't afford to not take risks. He brought the Zillo Beast to Coruscant so that the Separatists wouldn't have a chance at stealing it and using it against them. He beat around the bush, reminding them what they had to lose, what this war could cost all of them if the Confederacy pushed their lines too far back. Maybe Coruscant hadn't seen the war, but there were threats of total loss everywhere. The CIS was winning battles over and over again, but with the recent rout at Malastare, the Republic's hopes didn't seem too far lost. Chancellor Palpatine was standing his ground firmly, giving them antidotes of why this armor was needed, of what it could save the Republic financially, and how it could be the gift to end the Clone War. But there was no saving grace with many of these senators. The core was the paradise of the galaxy. It had been for years. To upset that status quo worried and angered a lot of sponsors. Truthfully, and is what irritated Palpatine the most, these arguments that filled the Rotunda weren't personal, mostly. There were members of the Loyalist Committee who seized this as an opportunity to grapple to power, but the majority of talking points came from the super PACs, and companies that saw this as a direct threat on their way of life. The Zillo Beast did millions if not billions of credits worth of damage, and the Republic would have to pay all of that off during a time of war. That was highly problematic. They couldn't afford to just waste away credits when the CIS was approaching fast. Despite his best, amidst the polemicized Senate chambers, a parsimonious member yelled out a spur-of-the-moment thought. It echoed across the sides of the rotunda, and in a moment of silence, out of shock, it was followed by a flood of raging voices. People spit out their demands for impeachment. Others defended the Chancellor. Mas Amedda turned towards Palpatine and felt the same shriek of dumbfounded surprise that hit him when Valorum was faced with the same option, barely 11 years before. He jabbed his staff to the floor of the Chancellor's pod and demanded a recess so that the minds of the Senate could come to a conclusion in peaceful terms. He attempted to defend the Chancellor, but this only made Mas Amedda a target to a furious crowd. Another senator slammed his fist on his pod and demanded that Mas Amedda face charges of corruption. He had been on the same side of the aisle twice, 2 for 2 with the most recent chancellors. Surely he had some sort of power inside the executive branch to survive 2 impeachments. In the same sentence, the senator yelled out that this was the end of the Amedda reign and the end of the Palpatine corruption. People jeered at the Chancellor, and despite what the Sith Lord wanted to do, kill them all, he simply proposed a vote to be taken, and they continued forward without the recess. Palpatine despised this, but there were no other choices. He could either cooperate and maintain his seating, or he could respond with hostility and lose his respect within these hallowed halls. He didn't know it yet, but Mas Amedda had just signed the death warrant for his long overstayed term as Chancellor. The Senate Rotunda was a continuously building array of frustration and grief. Sponsors threatened senators by saying that they would stop funding their lavish lifestyles if change wasn't made. Many people liked Palpatine, but this event, the attack of the Zillo Beast, was a show that the Republic had lost its way. The Chancellor's love of democracy had faded into some obscure power hunt. Sponsors saw this as a threat to their credits, especially the larger military PACs. If Palpatine could just erect a new form of armor that was more efficient and more protective, then all of them would be out of credits. No longer would deals for armor, undercoats, overcoats, helmets, weaponry, and so forth be needed from their warehouses. This could tank several businesses in one go. People liked Palpatine, but money talked more than policy, more than personal interest, and especially more than favoritism to a man who sat on the ropes throughout the last several months of the war. The elongated stay of Chancellor Palpatine made him a threat to some of these powerhouse PACs inside the Senate. They just needed something to push him off. And because for the first time he couldn't really make himself out to be a victim here, even though he was almost killed, the Senate knew he wouldn't have been in danger if he didn't bring that monster to Coruscant. Aside from the voting process, there were a few stances made. Masters Yoda and Windu contacted Masameda, while these short speeches were spoken to the members of the Senate to see if Palpatine wanted Jedi support. They were willing to back the Chancellor because the clones needed better protection. They saw this better armor, while inhumane, as a better attempt to save the lives of their men, more than anything. But Palpatine rejected Jedi support. If he won, with the help of the Jedi, then he would have an especially difficult time politically separating himself from them. This was the most turbulent situation his administration had ever seen. Surviving it, with the Jedi by his side, would make him look personally bound to the Order. Of course, there was the inverse where if he lost, the Jedi would look just as bad, if not worse, but he couldn't count on himself losing. This was a situation he needed to win. The Jedi gracefully accepted this, and kept an eye on the discussions. Anakin and Obi-Wan, who had been around Senator Amidala earlier in the day, would also confide with Windu and Yoda regarding this. It would be here where a new sense of trust would be gained for Anakin and the Council. He appreciated that they attempted to stand by the Chancellor. Anakin didn't fully realize that no one else inside the Rotunda knew that the Jedi had tried to, hence why the call to Masameda was done privately. When the vote came in, Palpatine was out, but there were many within the Senate Rotunda who believed this would come. So there was a bill forwarded by members of the Loyalist Committee. Even though senators believed that Palpatine would lose out the vote, the Chancellor had no reason to suspect that he would lose. Many stood by him in their speeches, but their votes said otherwise. Call it political peer pressure. Regardless, Senator Amidala confided with Rio, Bail, and Mon regarding a bill to defend the Republic from returning to another politically corrupt Chancellor. This bill proposed the temporary removal of the Chancellor's seat. In return, an elected vizier would maintain oversight as a speaker. This would, in theory, maximize Senate output so that they would be the most efficient versions of themselves politically. Amidala hoped to broker a peace treaty with the Separatists, and a single leader overseeing all Republic activity with emergency powers might not be the best way to achieve that. It would definitely challenge the Constitution, but the people who just won their impeachment over Palpatine saw this as an opportunity to seize more power too. The super PACs would be funding them anyways because of their willingness to betray a trusted ally, so what harm could a little more power do to any of them? The recklessness of the Zillo Beast attack left Palpatine inside of his executive chambers, coming to conclusions on how he would win the war effectively. Luckily, his friend Anakin Skywalker was joining him, with members of the High Council. They spoke shortly about the whole failure to defend him, and Palpatine played the foolish politician who didn't take Jedi advice. He couldn't really care about their political positions. It would have suited him to have their help, but he never expected to lose. He would quickly resolve any conversations with the High Council, and before they left, he requested to speak to Anakin alone. The Jedi saw no issue with this, and allowed him to stay behind. The former Chancellor apologized to Anakin. He never thought that he would lose, as he reiterated for the 4th or 5th time. He, though, wanted Anakin to remain his personal contact on Coruscant. He couldn't and wouldn't stay here. Palpatine believed that without Senate protection, he could face assassinations. This wasn't him asking for Anakin to follow him around. He'd be safe from his personal bunker elsewhere in the galaxy, but he wanted to remain in contact with Anakin, hoping that he might be able to keep him updated on Senate dealings. Not everything discussed in the Senate would become public, so Palpatine hoped that Anakin's Jedi intel could provide him with resources on a democracy he cared so much for. Sidious obviously wanted to keep control, to some extent, over the Republic. If Anakin could relay intel to the Sith Lord, then the CIS, or however he planned on going forward, could adjust accordingly. Palpatine had his own plans for galactic dominance, and losing the role of Chancellor didn't change a single thing. It just made his rise to power a bit more challenging. To become the Emperor of the Galaxy, he couldn't just remain in the spotlight. The CIS hated him, and the Republic betrayed him, so he wanted everything he could get from both sides. Masameda would lose all of his credentials, and Anakin wouldn't be a second thought to any single senator inside the Republic. Not even Amidala would consider him a threat to democracy. The talk between Skywalker and Palpatine would be shorter than the one between the Council and the former Chancellor. It, however, gave Palpatine everything he needed. There was a lot more trust and sympathy from Skywalker, and now the Sith Lord had a very trusted mole inside the Republic. He would plan to frame the Jedi and the Senate as corporate overlords, and confess how blind he had become to it. He would use the political fallout in the increasingly painful war to pull Anakin to his side. It would be a simple switch. Padme Amidala would be the only person stopping Anakin from changing. So Palpatine, amidst his other ranging thoughts, started considering ways to make her look like a traitor to Anakin. There was no secret bunker for Palpatine. He instead joined his apprentice on Sereno and revealed his one-year victory plan. It was developed by Plagueis and Palpatine prior to the blockade over Naboo. Plagueis was wise enough to see the great power his longtime ally, the Trade Federation, possessed. He realized that a properly militarized Federation could take the galaxy in the span of 1 year. Since killing his master, Palpatine returned to this plan and updated it over the years as he saw fit. Now that he actually needed it, everything was already properly aligned with how he needed it for this given moment. Palpatine's continuous determination to win this war kept him ahead of the game, and when he brought the one-year victory plan back to life, he could begin his work. Of course, it entailed activating the entire droid military for war against the Republic. Being that he was out of office, it served him no purpose to actually spare the Republic. The only individual that mattered on the other side of the war was Skywalker. Aside from him, the Confederacy would be utilized like a new Sith Empire. The Grand Army, Jedi, and Republic didn't feel this for another few weeks. Not because it took that long to activate the army, but because the war was at a current stalemate. Sieges and campaigns were in the middle of gridlock, and the added separatist reinforcements didn't fully break open the floodgates until expected victories became overwhelming losses. The Jedi and clones weren't prepared for the huge surge of CIS reinforcements, but they continued to fight. The Order, despite trying to aid Palpatine, went under the radar. Masameda would have thrown them under the bus, but Palpatine abandoned him, and he preferred to stay alive. He knew to an extent what his old boss was, and he had no intention to face his wrath. Though without realizing it, telling the Jedi about the former Chancellor could have saved his life. Due to Masameda's decision to not rat anyone out, the Jedi Council was working much more closely with the Senate to request relief bills and military expansion packages to assist them with defending territory that was coming under siege. Anakin, having seen the Jedi stand by Palpatine's side, felt more trust for the Council and willingly followed their direction without trouble. He hoped that the war could come to an end quickly, but that was unlikely. Palpatine knew Anakin would be pushed towards the front lines. He anticipated that his future pupil would contact him too. But Anakin didn't have the time. His battles were strenuous, and with a now 15-year-old Padawan under his guidance, he needed to be focused on her needs too. The 501st was outfitted with additional troops and vessels, so they could continue to hammer down against the Separatists. But everyone on their side of the war started to become concerned. Loss after loss smashed Republic lines. They couldn't find any good grace, and they most certainly didn't have the chance to claim a single victory. Every performance they put up was more embarrassing than the one that came before it. Some notable victors were Masters Balaba, Kenobi, Windu, Plo, and of course Anakin's unit, but the Jedi were losing too many more than they were winning. Pong Krell, for example, and his entire army were wiped out by an attack force led by General Grievous. Ema Gun Di and the rebels on Ryloth were almost entirely massacred, with Cham Syndulla leading an underground resistance into the caves of the planet. Some systems, regardless of affiliation, were wiped off the face of the galaxy. This was the new Sith Empire, and without more clones funneling out of Kamino, in a need to protect the system from Separatist attacks, the Senate voted on a new bill to start a draft. They would pull everyone into their ranks and start sending fresh troops of civilians off to war. When, not if, this bill passed, it would signify the end of Republic and CIS relationships. A peace treaty would no longer be feasible because Republic citizens would be dying in war. So with this vote underway, Senator Amidala, escorted by Master Yoda, went to Raxus, where she would confront her former advisor and longtime friend, Mina Bontiri. In the meantime, because Palpatine couldn't learn about this from Anakin, he and Tyrannus were scheming up their own approach to galactic domination. Slowly, some of the cracks in the foundation of Dooku's idealistic society started to show. It wasn't that his plans were flawed, more or less, but what he wanted didn't exactly align with Palpatine's desires. Dooku didn't show his regret, or sometimes pull back, in an effort to maintain loyalty to Sidious. But even though the new separatist regime saw him as the Emperor, he knew that no matter what he wanted, it wouldn't last, and Sidious would always be 2 steps ahead and the next in line to the throne. Dooku had built a government for the people, and despite the corporate alliance funding their side of the war, that same government would be run by an oligarchic autocrat, himself and then Palpatine. Dooku had to determine if he could live with that or not. General Grievous and Asajj Ventress remained on the front lines, crushing through Republic defense lines, and pushing closer to the colonies on certain battlefronts, the Inner Rim elsewhere, and even the core in the northern part of the galaxy. This was their chance for total victory. Grievous's collection was growing by the week, and Ventress's revenge felt vindicated with every life she took. This was the true Clone War. With vets instructing militiamen and women in the core, new ranks of forces were being sent out to the front lines to aid. Even though all of these new troopers would be ground militias, they were an added cushion for the clones. Space battles in a galactic war like this were much more important though, so these new militia forces, regardless of their training, weren't exactly useful unless the CIS invaded the surface of a given planet. At that, when the CIS landed, with hundreds of thousands of battle droids, they would overwhelmingly crush civilian resistance. The options for the militias were to fight and watch their worlds burn, or to surrender and only watch half of it burn. The choices were difficult, but the answer soon became clear to other worlds. This wasn't a surrender type of war. This was a fight to the bitter end type of war. Guerrillas like Saw Gerrera started to pop up around the galaxy, because the slow and meticulous curation of a galactic empire no longer was needed. This was a full-blown war for control over the galaxy. The war no longer mattered on the front lines of policies, and even though Sidious made the approach of the battle droids more traditional Sith-like, it didn't change the fact that he wasn't like the Ancients. Palpatine burned civilizations to scare others. Every people he did slaughter, or burn, or genocide had nothing to offer to the galaxy. These people were expendable, their planets had no resources useful to him, and he could afford to make examples out of these people. Padme and Yoda, on the other hand, returned from Raxus with new documents signed by a new caucus in the Confederacy that saw this war going too far. It was proposed to the Republic as a treaty of mercy. The Senate didn't want to sign it because it was embarrassing, but the millions of battle droids would wipe them all out, and they couldn't afford to keep pretending that they wouldn't. This mercy treaty wasn't something the CIS wanted either. Those who joined the Confederacy wanted freedom, not mass murder. Mina Bontiri, because of this, had little trouble rounding up the sides of the Separatists to join her, and Dooku had to try and figure out a way to get a bombing crew on Coruscant to destroy their power grid. But because the Sith were too far behind, they couldn't stop it. The Sith had lost. Well, actually they hadn't. Official documentation to end the war may have been signed, ratified, and accepted by the CIS, Republic, and Neutral Systems Coalition, but the Sith didn't care for policy. With a single swoop, when the senators refused to back down to Dooku's threats, they would be killed. It wouldn't be hidden, or played off as a Republic attack. The Sith were in charge. Dooku, while not referring to himself as a Sith Lord, crowned himself as Tsar of the Confederacy. And yeah, I picked Tsar because it sounds cool. The Republic couldn't believe themselves. It was like the wind was taking out of everyone's lungs, because they had just saved the entire galaxy. The official documentation, while not totally favoring the Republic, meant an end to the war. Essentially, the Confederacy was being recognized as a separate entity and a proper government, which is all what those senators really wanted. They wanted to be legitimatized. They got it. Then they died for doing it. Dooku did truthfully feel bad. All of his Sith training, all of his purpose for the last 11 years had come to fruition, and he was pushed to go further. Did he have traitorous thoughts? If he did, he never uttered a word, nor showed hesitation. He didn't even bat an eye. The Jedi Order knew what came next, and as a means to brace for impact, decided to do the unthinkable. The High Council gathered some of his best negotiators and dispersed them out to the galaxy. Anakin didn't know about this, but he was brought back to Coruscant. It was a somber few days after the CIS Senator massacre. The war slowed down ever so briefly, so that the rest of the galaxy could see what it meant to oppose the Confederacy. The neutral systems hid behind Mandalore, and the Duchess refused to give in to terror. She called it what no senator in the Republic dare call it. Satine called the situation a crisis, and the actions of the Confederacy an unprovoked genocide. Maybe it was foolishness, maybe it was to save others from the wrath of the CIS, but Satine and her people became targets of the Sith regime almost instantly when she sent that message to the galaxy. It may have not landed with all, but those within the CIS saw that their movement was a scapegoat for ulterior aspirations. Dooku didn't care about a free system, one to oppose the Republic and corruption, and no matter how small the shift was following the Duchess of Mandalore's speech, it was more than there would have been without it. The change, the recognition, the bravery to stand against the idealistic threat that was the regime Dooku headed was enough to assist the Jedi with their new plan to save the galaxy. Even while Anakin was on Coruscant and had more free time, he never really thought to call Palpatine. They had spoken maybe once in the last few months since his impeachment. Skywalker recalled very little from the conversation, or if it even happened. He was focused on Ahsoka's training, and being with Padme as the galaxy watched in horror as other planets were swallowed into the abyss of genocide. As Anakin was visiting the High Council, he'd be surprised by an incoming transmission, a new ally added to the Republic fight. It brought him rage, and completely severed all the trust he gained with the Council following the impeachment. On the hologram was Jabba the Hutt. The leader of the Hutt crime family had created a long-term agreement with the other criminal organizations across the Outer Rim. This call with the Jedi Council was confirmation from Jabba that every single criminal regime was joining the Jedi, not the Republic, in this war against the Separatists. The proper amount of clones and Jedi reinforcements would be sent to various criminal outposts so that they could best provide aid. At the same time as this conversation was taking place, a group of clones led by Commander Thorn were sent to Scipio to take control over the banking clans. The Republic and the Senator, who sent these clones, were going to take out all the loans they could to fund a Republic war effort. They didn't know about this new alliance brewing at the heart of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant. This attack also on the banking clans was utilized to hurt the CIS, but that didn't really matter at this point. The droids had more forces than anyone else in the galaxy. When the call inside the temple ended, young Skywalker stormed to the center of the room and demanded consciousness from the Council. How could they damn the Republic or society to the greed of these animals? The rage that slaughtered the Tusken Raiders showed itself, and he hovered his hand over his lightsaber. He wasn't doing it intentionally per se, but on instinct. He had grown so accustomed to pulling his weapon whenever the opportunity presented itself. He told them that they couldn't trust the Hutts, and Master Windu, from a galaxy away, in the middle of defending another miscellaneous system from a massive siege, told Anakin that the Jedi weren't doing this for any other reason than to save the galaxy. The hologram of Windu and the present body of Anakin stood feet apart, as Mace explained that he needed to understand that the galaxy was as close as it had been in centuries to total destruction. This was a Sith war, whether they liked it or not. To stop a threat this large, the Jedi made a deal to work with the criminal organizations. This was no pleasure to any of them, but if these groups could steal battle droids, battleships, or resources, then they could turn the CIS against itself. The recent Senate massacre had already made people afraid. The Jedi were incentivizing a revolution from within. They couldn't afford to win this war alone. The clones were being pushed to their limits, the militia couldn't do really anything, and the only hope of a resistance were the guerrillas that persisted regardless of their homeworlds being destroyed or not. Anakin's hostility ceased, and Mace, despite being disappointed, understood. It wasn't an easy choice. No one, not in the council chambers, was happy about it. He assured Anakin that the council wouldn't force him, or any of his troopers, to work with the slavers. The bad history there would be erased though. Anakin watched as the Jedi Master's hologram turned and sat back down. He asked Master Windu what he meant, and he turned to his right. Ki-Adi-Mundi spoke up, informing Anakin that this conversation was to remain within their hallowed chambers. Skywalker nodded, sensing this as a moment of trust being established between the Council and himself. It was suggested highly by Kenobi that in the scenario that Anakin found out, they should be transparent with him. The minds of the Council agreed with that notion. Ki-Adi-Mundi told young Skywalker that this alliance with the criminal organizations was not transactional. Their recent bond with the Senate while being very public, wasn't as deeply rooted as many thought it was. The Jedi were utilizing this public showing of trust to establish relations with those who needed leverage to get what they wanted. The Council was that leverage, and they were going to win this war with the Separatists, and in one fell swoop, demolish every single criminal organization in the Outer Rim. This war would be a galactic reset. Master Jocasta believed that it'd be best for the Jedi to consult Old Republic Doomsday protocols, which they had. Master Mundi confirmed that the purpose of these clones and Jedi working with the criminal organizations was to undermine their every move from the first step. Win the war, but don't allow the crime families to get a leg up once that war comes to a conclusion. This was to destroy the Sith, and Anakin, with a sense of shock rolling down his body, understood what all of this meant. He again, profusely this time, apologized for acting out. From behind him, Depa Billaba reassured him that the Council didn't take his reaction personally. They all understood his past with slavers, but they had each also realized that this was their only chance to ensure slavery was abolished galaxy-wide at the end of the war. She then proposed that he be ready in the circumstance that they defeat the Separatists before the CIS destroys the crime families. The subtext basically promised that he'd have a chance to get his dutiful revenge. Not outward, not rage-filled, but dutiful chance to end slavery himself. The new branch of the war began. The CIS engaged the Republic at Kamino again, but Jedi forces combined with one of the largest Republic fleets was able to push back the droids. It was General Grievous's first defeat since Palpatine's impeachment, and it came from none other than Eth Koth, Shaak Ti, and Saesee Tiin. Obviously, he was defeated in a space battle, not on the ground. As the defeated fleet retreated from Kamino, Anakin led the 501st on the offensive. The Republic hadn't made a daring move like this in a while, but this was again the Council putting their faith and trust into Skywalker. It was a diversion, one meant to draw in reinforcements from CIS Foundry worlds. It worked like a charm too. Most of the CIS industrial planets weren't heavily fortified anyways, but it was best to ensure that the Jedi, clone, and pirate task forces had the easiest of access to these foundries. Anakin's assault was a total blitz. Venators raged in the combat, and the Separatist fleet, unprepared for a counter because it didn't match any of their algorithmic data, were blindsided. They fought back, and due to superior numbers they were able to hold their own, but Anakin and Ahsoka behind him plowed their way between frigates and cruisers, giving room for bombers to shred through defense systems and shield generators. Admiral Yularen mastered fleet command and detonated every single vessel that challenged them. While Skywalker's unit tore through the CIS fleet and fought off the reinforcements, the task force snuck into the foundries and stole everything. From battle droids to vessels, it didn't matter. Thanks to some engineers, technicians, and droidsmiths, the Jedi, clones, and pirates were able to reconfigure this military into an army to benefit themselves, though it wouldn't be used immediately. Every available asset would be taken, and every remaining foundry would be demolished. On various battlefronts, this same strategy would be used. It didn't matter which Jedi or their clone or militia legion, all that mattered was what the pirates took, and that they destroyed the foundries. Because even though the reserve military was activated and still fighting, the Separatists, in all their great power, didn't stop producing. Sidious knew the Jedi were likely to scrounge up citizen support. He wanted to crush them. He never anticipated this move though, and because of how the Jedi operated, the CIS weren't wise enough to realize where their troops were going. They really just assumed that all of their newly produced vessels and troops were being destroyed. These mass-stealing operations didn't result in immediate Republic support though. The crime families needed to build up their own military so they could fight back. That was part of the deal. They needed to defend themselves first and foremost. The Jedi understood this begrudgingly, and didn't challenge the crime families because of how badly they needed their support. The biggest benefit that the Republic got, more than anything, was the fact that they were taking pressure off of supply lines and taking out thousands of enemy forces. It didn't change the mass size of the opposition, but at the very least put a dent in their numbers, and especially in their production output. A main focus at home on Coruscant was the focus on the corporate alliances. Instead of playing dumb and allowing them to send their forces to the CIS and play games inside the Senate, the Republic executed them publicly. It was meant to show power, but Dooku had killed half of his senators. He didn't care, and Sidious certainly didn't. This, though, allowed the Republic to remove leadership and instill fear into the corporate sector. that still had control over their companies. These individuals, in fear of the Republic, would donate resources to the quote-unquote Jedi-led resistance, which funneled battle droids and vessels into the Outer Rim for the crime families to utilize. These corporate people would be provided amnesty, if they could get to Republic territory, but they had to get there by themselves. Clones weren't going to risk their lives for some board members of a company. It was a bit of dirty deal-making, but it was needed. The Senate, with more control in their chambers and the Visor overseeing bills and amendments and changes to the Constitution, allowed the Republic to arm and protect itself. The Tsar of the Confederacy still remained unrelenting. He pushed for the destruction of Mandalore, and just as the CIS encroached on their territory, they were smacked from the back by a massive criminal fleet consisting of CIS vessels, just painted with yellow markings to represent the Hutts, Zygerians, Black Suns, Pikes, and so forth. There was a certain pride from these groups, because they were finally challenging a galactic power. Not since Marchion Ro and the Nile had any group from the Outer Rim posed a legitimate threat to the galaxy. It felt good, and made them proud. Of course, their eyes were on the true prize. Like the Jedi, the criminal organizations planned on backstabbing their allies, but they needed to defeat the Separatists before they could ever hope to make a move against the Republic. The war was gritty. It was fierce, and it continued to beat down everyone involved for months, stretching into years. Barriss Offee, instead of bombing the temple, would, like Ahsoka, reach the rank of knighthood. The two best friends would serve a splinter group of the 501st called the 332nd. Rex wouldn't be a part of it. Instead, Captain Vong would be their #1 trooper. They would stay in alignment with the 501st, mostly trailing behind them and cleaning up pockets of Separatist resistance. Anakin, as the war continued to grow longer, lost interest in talking to Palpatine. He and the former Chancellor kept tabs on each other more frequently than the initial period after the impeachment, but Anakin felt disrespected by Palpatine's suggestions for using different aspects of the Force. The Sith Lord attempted to sway Anakin to join him with ideas and gifts of power, so that Anakin could experience more of his own talents with the Force. But Skywalker didn't see any value in this. More than anything, he felt slighted because his public servant best friend didn't seem at all interested in preserving the Republic, and he also didn't really value what Anakin was doing for the Republic. This wasn't necessarily true, but Anakin recognized that Palpatine didn't remain committed to the people suffering in the galaxy. It made him sense that his friend really was just another corrupt politician, not a special man with good intentions to do right by the people of the galaxy. It was very disheartening. But sometimes, strands need to be cut loose. He grew more when he stopped communicating with the Chancellor anyways. Despite the war raging on for multiple years by this point, there wasn't really any pull in a significant direction. The Tsar of the Confederacy was growing weaker by the day. The Separatists had to position him up for propaganda, and he rarely showed himself otherwise. His undetermined thoughts on betraying his master were certified. He, at the beginning of the 5th year of combat, would be consumed by the Force. The embrace of the dark side would engulf him. He would never meet Qui-Gon Jinn in the afterlife. All he would face is darkness. Its constant wrongdoings, his faulty decisions, his betrayal of self set him down this desolate purgatory. Sidious wouldn't even be by his side at his natural death. A dedicated 15 years of service to the Sith path, the start of a war and the elongation of it, all for nothing. At this point in the war, Ventress was killed by Sidious's hand. Maul had returned but was defeated by Kenobi once again when he tried to turn the criminal families against the Jedi, and General Grievous remained Sidious's true militaristic ally. Ventress tried to betray Sidious to protect her master, Dooku, but it failed. The Night Sisters were long gone, due to Talzin remaining a threat, and Mandalore was engulfed by a civil war before getting destroyed. The neutral systems, as a result, flocked to the Republic, and the three-way war never reached Coruscant. Sidious never predicted that the Jedi would align themselves with the criminal families, and he paid the price for it. The Clone Wars, which truly were multiple wars this time, wouldn't come to an end with the Sith. Palpatine took control following Dooku's death, and he rode the CIS closer to Coruscant than anyone had before him. The war, as the CIS slowly lost more and more systems to the Republic or crime families, or lost battle droids to pirate raids, became the main target of obliteration. Palpatine, in his time by Dooku's side, had survived dozens of assassination attempts, from food poisoning to being shot in the back to even surviving a detonation on his ship. What would kill Palpatine was a gas bomb constructed by an entire town, and it was a suicide pact. Palpatine worked from the shadows of Sereno, and the population, filled with grief and regret, constructed a gas bomb to encompass their entire town and pretty much a 45-mile radius outside of it. Men, women, and children would perish in this, but the people blamed themselves just as much as they blamed their Sith overlord. Their complacency in this war, their inability to stop genocide or Dooku, stripped them of their humanity. Many felt that it was the greatest choice they had ever made by killing themselves. In his sleep, the gas bomb would drop. Everything, not just the people but the animals, the plants, the wildlife, would all be consumed by the gas bomb. As was said though, this didn't stop the war. General Grievous remained atop of the CIS military, and slowly, as it became clear that the Separatists wouldn't have the forces to maintain a long-form war, the Jedi pulled their contingencies on the crime families. It wasn't a done deal, but 5 million new clones were rising up, preparing to take arms against the droids. There was also a certain patriotism for militiamen, who at this point could be considered Republic Marines. The earliest of them had 4 years of service under their belts. The Clone Wars were truly a galactic-scale war, one that impacted every facet of society. There wasn't a world in the Republic or former neutral systems that didn't send people to fight against the battle droids. The criminal faction, which was never revealed to be aligned with the Jedi, saved the Republic from getting totally crushed in the war. When the Jedi pulled the rug out from under them, no one was prepared. Some of these contingencies came with the activation of Order 99, the droid initiative that turned battle droids into semi-sentient weapons that would target and kill their ownership. Other operations included straight-up assassinations on criminal heads. Anakin did get the pleasure of tearing through Jabba's palace. It wasn't necessarily permitted, but when the Council learned about what Palpatine really was and how he had pushed Skywalker towards darkness, they allowed the Jedi Master to take a group of his best clones to Tatooine and kill Jabba, one of the best days of his life. Despite the crime families losing almost all their power in a few days' notice, the war still didn't end. Their grunts continued to fight, and the war, instead of continuing to be a full-blown team-up, would turn into a 3-way game. But the Jedi strategists planned the end of the war to best suit themselves. With Grievous in charge, he would target the overly aggressive crime families, seeing their weaknesses and their loss of leadership, and they would withhold long enough for the Republic to sweep in from behind. Attacking the Outer Rim when they did cost Grievous dearly, and the allied forces of clones, Marines, and Jedi would be the reckoning the galaxy needed. Master Skywalker wouldn't ever see Grievous's face, but he would champion the Republic. He, with a ponytail behind his head and a little facial hair finally growing in, would be across the Republic on propaganda. It was a sight of a Jedi Master with his lightsaber in one hand and the Republic battle flag in another. Behind and around him were the men of the 501st. Not only was it an actual battle moment, but a victory that would silence the oppressive Separatist regime. Anakin would famously be overheard motivating his men during the final battle. The words, "For those we never meet," would ring across the galaxy. The Great Clone Wars, the conflict that stretched nearly into its 6th year, would end in this. The war, ironically, didn't necessarily immediately end. With the Senate holding control over the banking clans with force, they permitted themselves to drought the economy by doing what the Jedi planned on doing, seizing everything. The Republic had itself an actual military. There were over 400 million troopers who joined over the course of the war. Most of these men and women were stationed on their home worlds, because the Republic simply didn't make enough transports to support that. Thanks to Mon Cala, the Republic Navy survived the war. Regardless, these troopers wouldn't just retire. That was a huge undertaking for a government recovering from a war filled with multiple planetary genocides. They, as a result, sent many of these veterans to the Outer Rim to stop a resurgence movement from springing up. How the crime families were destroyed before Grievous ever got there would forever remain a mystery to the Senate. But it was dealt with, so who really cares? Due to the turbulence of the most intense conflict the galaxy had truly ever seen, Anakin and Padme didn't have children, and they wouldn't until they were both over the age of 30. The post-war era was strenuous. Padme had a bid for the new Chancellor role, and that was being titled Prime Minister. Anakin was serving on the High Council, rising to Master of the Order, serving behind one of his favorite Jedi friends, Grandmaster Windu. They both had extremely important jobs, and they stuck to them, but also rejoiced in being able to stand by each other's side on Coruscant for the first time in almost years. Also, Padme loved the long hair, and to her point, Anakin kinda rocked the Kanan Jarrus look. The Great Reset, prophesied by Jocasta Nu, was a reality that the galaxy had to deal with, but the preparations made by the Jedi to adjust for it allowed the Republic to come out on top. The Senate had the chance to take this Great Reset as a chance to bring the galaxy together, and since the Jedi Order had earned so much political favorability, they would interject themselves where they needed to. Outer Rim representation mattered. Former Separatist representation mattered. The Jedi protected those people, and with the selection of Senator Amidala as the first Republic Prime Minister, she would also protect their rights. She'd make sure that the right people were targeted and removed from power, and put into prison or executed rightly. Padme's administration would be challenging, of course made more difficult 3 to 4 years into it because of the pregnancy, but she adored serving the Republic. Her administration, made up of Rio Chuchi and Led Morai, would take care of the Republic during her maternal leave. She stayed as active as she could, but they didn't let her wear herself out. Anakin aided her as well, but they kept the relationship secretive until it got to a point that the Jedi just really wouldn't care. Master Skywalker and his now Counselor student, Ahsoka, had given so much to the Order that perhaps they could bend the rule for him a little bit. In the end, the Republic would stop the crime families from ever finding footing. It would be responsible for the total unification of the galaxy and the resurgence of galactic community. Anakin's words, his statement, that highlighted the end of the war became commonplace around the galaxy. No longer was this galactic republic a fight for survival on every level due to corporate greed, but a galactic community, a decision, a choice, selectively made by the masses that good can and should be done for those that they will never meet. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to the patrons for supporting the channel. Let's talk about this story. So, having Palpatine get impeached obviously changes a lot, and this story obviously has to be a little bit C-SPAN-esque. I don't know if I would categorize it as a C-SPAN story. I'd probably say like 40% C-SPAN, like 60% just war. And I really wanted to cover the mass size of the war. Like, this war is huge comparatively. I also really love the concept of the Jedi uniting with the crime families, but not actually uniting. Like, they're just in it to screw them over, basically, which is kind of hilarious because the Jedi don't typically do that. But that was kind of the reason that they did that, just to screw them over. Because in this scenario where the CIS is activating so many battle droids, you're kind of just looking at the end of like the end of time, basically. And I think the Jedi recognize that, and using like an Old Republic Doomsday Protocol is really how I think that they would come out on top. I also think that in this scenario, in this given scenario, where Palpatine kind of reverts to being a traditional Sith, operating from the other side of the bad guy side, I really don't think Anakin would find a lot of reason to be like, oh, you're my best bud. Like, I think he liked Palpatine a bit for his camaraderie with the Republic, his also like leadership, and he's not doing that here. He's just kind of like sitting around, like kind of just watching pod racing on the couch, and I don't really think Anakin would appreciate that a whole lot. So that's why there's such a strain on the relationship and why they just stopped talking, because I think Anakin would just lose a lot of respect for Palpatine, and I think that respect is a very big and crucial part of their relationship. So I hope you all enjoyed. Love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.